Brought to you by Penguin.
The Psychosis of Whiteness, Surviving the Insanity of a Racist World. Written and read by me, Kehinde Andrews. For Asata Kadiri and Marjay Ajani, and all those who appreciate that you can't spell slaughter without spelling laughter. Preface. Through the Looking Glass. I grew up in a generation where the TV was a focal point of the living room, but it was tightly controlled by my father and limited by the fact we only had 4 channels. We probably could have afforded Sky, but my dad was too old and Jamaican for those kinds of luxuries. We rented our video player, even though we ended up paying 3 times what it would have cost to buy. As a child, the main way I interacted with the TV was to turn the dial to whichever station my dad wanted to watch. For those of you under 30, it will be difficult to imagine the TV of my youth, which had a remote we could never find and was housed in a gigantic wooden backing. Like in most houses, the TV had an outsized impact on our lives, framing the evening and sparking family conversations. I was lucky enough to have been born too late to have to endure the black and white minstrel show on the BBC, which from 1958 ran for 20 years. Yes, white performers would black up and coon on mainstream TV. This is what publicly funded television had to offer, and there were only 3 channels to choose from. In 1964, it achieved its peak viewing figure of 16.5 million people. It was so popular that the album On Stage with the George Mitchell Minstrels hit number 1 in the charts in 1962, and Mitchell, who orchestrated the Minstrels, remains the only person to hold 1st, 2nd, and 4th place in the charts at the same time. The space for black representation was so limited during this period that Sir Lenny Henry, now one of Britain's most cherished TV personalities, joined the cast in the 1970s to get his first break in the industry. Reflecting on his regrets in being in the show, he remembers that people used to say Lenny was the only one who didn't need makeup, and talks about how it tipped him into a profound wormhole of depression. I may have swerved the era of the black and white minstrel show, but when I was growing up, Lenny Henry was one of the very few black people on the shimmering box. ITV's News at 10 was appointment viewing when Sir Trevor MacDonald from Trinidad became the sole presenter in 1992. On the rare occasions black-led shows came on, it felt like every black person tuned in. I feel like I personally know all the characters in the Channel 4 show Desmond, set in a barbershop in Peckham, which aired from 1989. I was probably too young to watch the comedy sketch show The Real McCoy when it first was shown in 1991, but my parents never kicked me out when it came on. But these shows were oases in a desert of whiteness. Blackface continued in hit shows like Little Britain until the early 2000s. This was before social media, so widespread condemnation from black communities was completely ignored. It appears as though British comedians have an addiction to blackface. The League of Gentlemen, Come Fly With Me, The Mighty Bush, and Bo Selector, all of which debuted in the 21st century, have now been removed from some streaming platforms. The removal of Little Britain from BBC iPlayer and Netflix caused the biggest stir. Commentators decried their removal as censorship and an example of so-called cancel culture. I have had far too much experience with this debate. I have gone from a child watching TV to becoming a talking head today who gets invited onto news and discussion programs to discuss the burning issues of the day. It is at once a gift and a curse to break the 4th wall for yourself. Once you have, it becomes clear that the normal rules of reason no longer apply, and that if you do not stay tethered to outside reality, you may be consumed by the chaos. It is a privilege to be able to act as a guide for others through this upside-down world that frames all of our lives. The Little Britain debates I took part in on Sky News and for Good Morning Britain were full of the kind of deluded thinking that are the motivation for this audiobook. The BBC had proclaimed that times have changed, and this seemed to be the baseline for the discussion. I patiently explained that blackface was offensive even in the 18th century, let alone at the turn of the 21st. On Good Morning Britain, I found myself verbally sparring with Tom Harwood, who was apparently in his 20s but looked and argued like he was still in high school. Not for the first time in my television career, I wondered why I accepted the invitation. On Sky News, I was pitted against Dominique Samuels, who I later spent 10 days with filming a BBC TV show called We Are Black and British. The only difference between Samuels and Harwood is that Samuels is black.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?